Okay, I think we're live. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for everyone who is already here. I got a new mic, so I'm hoping you can hear me, and please let me know if there's any issues. I decided to turn this video into a live um, because mostly because I wanted to take last night off and my plans fell through today, so I had the time. So we are doing this live and it's going to be a lot of fun. Eyes are the hardest for me. I totally get that. And they were always the hardest for me too, but they're also the most important part of your pet portrait, which means we have to get them right. And that's also why I usually start with eyes, because they're so important that if I mess them up, I don't have to waste the rest of my time trying to paint the rest of the portrait. I may as well just start over. So that's originally why I started painting eyes first. And that's also, I still do that just because they're so important. You want to get them right. And then you can almost like, the eyes are done. The rest of the portrait should just be all downhill from here. So really fun. And from sunny California. So it is very snowy here in Minnesota today. And it's just a great, cozy day to sit and paint. So this is really fun. I'm really happy to be here with you guys painting. And thank you for the Twin Cities Live. That was a ton of fun. I had never really even thought that I'd ever be on TV or live TV. And the hosts and the guests and the staff, everybody I met was so nice. All you kind of think when you're going on TV that it could be like this odd, dynamic, cutthroat situation because that's what you see in Hollywood shows. It wasn't like that at all. It was just a really nice, chill vibe. Everybody's really friendly. And what a well-oiled machine. They knew what they were doing. Ben introduced himself to me legit less than 30 seconds before he had to be on camera live. And it was no big deal. That's crazy. Super fun. I hope you get a chance to watch the segment if you're interested, because it was really quite the surprise when they saw their pet portraits. We get to, let me check my cheat sheet. I only had one question really that I wanted to go over. I had two people ask me if I do landscape tutorials, and the answer right now is no, I don't have any, and I'm also not quite planning on doing landscapes anytime soon. I love painting landscapes, and I encourage you, if that's what you really, really love to do, to find some artists out there who teach landscapes. Sterling Edwards is one of my favorite artists who does landscapes, and I eat all his stuff up because it's amazing, and he approaches landscapes in a really unique way that kind of speaks to what I like about watercolor, where it's a combination of detail and abstract watery elements, and it makes his landscapes look so good. So definitely go for that, because you'll burn out on watercolor if you're not painting what you want to paint. So find an artist that you admire, and hopefully they teach in some capacity. Otherwise, there's tons of books at the library, and that's how I usually always went. I like books, and hopefully I'll have a book someday too. So that would be fun. So it's definitely not out of the question down the road, because I love painting landscapes, but I want to get a little bit more confident with how to teach it. Have a little bit more of a system in place so I can teach it in a way that makes students, where it's easier to follow versus just like, let's do whatever we feel like, because that's kind of what I do right now, and I don't think that's worth teaching. So enjoy, just paint what you enjoy. Find somebody who can teach the subject matter that you like. Although I would say that the techniques and even the 3-step process that I teach will be helpful for you. So even if you find somebody else, I would definitely give my technique videos and my principle videos, and even maybe my property videos a view, because some of those techniques are really cool, easy things that you can definitely incorporate into landscapes. Last video, we talked about the grainer brush and how that's great for foliage, right? And that's a landscape technique. So there's a lot of possibilities. So go ahead and keep asking your questions and giving me whatever verbiage you want to in the chat. I'm going to go ahead and switch over and get started. on drawing. So you'll see in the description and in the email that I sent that there's no tracing for this video. We are just going to go right in and draw these by hand. So I did draw out 2 by hand already just to save you guys time watching me draw. It's not the most exciting thing. So we're going to do a dog eye. This is actually the same eye we did when we painted Sully. And you, of course, see that in the reference photos I sent you. And then we have a cat eye with a really large pupil. And what I'm going to draw in front of you, so you get an idea of how I approach drawing, I guess, is a cat eye with a small pupil. So hopefully you'll have those reference photos in front of you and can take a look at what I'm drawing. Typically it's easier for me to do, when you're looking at the reference photo, the left eye, which would be the animal's right eye. I don't know if that's because I'm right-handed or not. But anyway, so I'm drawing out the cat with the small pupil with the green eye. And I usually just start with the eye shape itself and get that right before I draw in a lot of those details. And I do think it's kind of nice to keep your drawing skills fresh. So if you have a chance to sketch, or if you, especially if you love drawing itself, I would, do as much of that as possible, because it's just going to make you a better artist for sure. And I always, typically, even after you trace, you have to refine some of the details in the eyes to make sure you know where you're going to eventually be putting your paint. So even if we would have traced these, I would have gone back in and given myself an opportunity to make sure everything is where it should be, and we have all these details planned out so that we know where we're putting our paint, and then it takes that stress off when we start painting. So let's see. This is my cat, Saru. He has the most beautiful green eyes. And I took this picture of him when he was outside with us, looking around at all the birds. And I just thought it was such a cute, kind of an interesting expression he had on his face. I've already painted this one as well. But this will be really fun, I think, to show you this quick 3-step process I came up with for eyes. Because before I kind of came up with this, I would just kind of feel it out and do whatever. But coming up with these systems so I can teach them better has helped me a ton too. I really love it, because then it takes that guesswork out. I'm like, oh, I just follow the 3-step process. And it's really nice. So normally I would maybe make this reflection line a little bit lighter so that it doesn't pop through after we paint it. Once you paint over pencil lines, I've found that you cannot really erase them. I'm going to keep it dark just so you can see it better. So what we're going to do next, which will be kind of fun, I'm just going to make sure I can see your chats. I upgraded my setup after last time's kind of sound fiasco. I got a new mic. I got a second monitor for my lives. As you can see, the resolution on my webcam is way better. That was just a setting I had to fix. I didn't have to get a new camera, which was great. Okay, cool. So, so some people are talking about Shelley Pryor does landscapes. Awesome. There's so many amazing watercolor artists out there, and you should learn from the best, from the people that you're really excited about. We have eyes, so we have some comments coming in from tips about how to do watercolor eyes. It's so much fun. So what we're going to do actually is, before I start, I want to show you, I don't have this PDF linked yet on YouTube, but I will. And it's going to be a quick PDF that you can reference anytime you're painting eyes and you're wondering where to start. So this is kind of nice because it's going to do the step 1, which is black outlines. Step 2 is the iris with the color in it. And then step 3 is reflections. And we're going to practice reflections extra because that's what makes an eye pop. That and then a really beautiful iris. So this is this process I'm going to follow. I'm going to upload this PDF as soon as I have pictures from today's video that I can pop in to the PDF itself. I'll have that there for you guys to download. So step 1 is black outlines, which you know if you've painted along with me in any of the paint alongs so far, that I love to give myself a little cheat sheet and paint black outlines first. So that means a nice heavy mix of your black color. Of course, I'm using neutral tint. I got a bunch of core watercolors yesterday and very excited I got carbon black in addition to their neutral tint, because I really like a clean black that goes well with warm and cool. So I'm interested to see how that behaves when it mixes with warm colors and cool colors. So we're going to go ahead and just paint some black outlines everywhere we see the darkest blacks. And when we paint these black outlines, we're being very careful to not paint the iris or the reflections. And I'm using my size 6 silver black velvet brush, which I really love because it comes to a nice fine point. And normally I don't paint eyes this big unless I'm working really big, but I want you to be able to see it. So don't be afraid to go smaller with the brush you're using to get a finer line, especially if you're working smaller, which you most likely are working smaller for something like this. Now this eye is unique in that most of the pupil is behind this reflection, so it will be a lighter black color. The other thing what we want to do is I like to keep this brush as my wet brush that I use for blotting, or that I blot, and I usually just have a water on it. So when we paint black, we're going to be mindful of the edges at the same time. So this is part of step 1, and what I'm going in to do is soften this edge at the top and let it bleed into the shadow that he has on top of his eye. Because it's black up there, but it's kind of a softer black. So we don't need it. That's my cat, I think, wants to come in, if you hear the knocking on the door. So we are just letting that bleed into up here, and that looks really cool. And maybe we'll get some granulation. If we pop in a little bit more water, we'll get some more fun things happening there. And of course, we got to do that down here too. Let this bleed into the outside, right here. Pop in a little bit more black and let it bleed around. And maybe soften that edge a little bit. Now we're kind of going to do that same thing up here because it's black, but it's a really light black because it's behind that reflection. So let's see, let's just try a watery mix. If we can just get away with a watery mix of neutral tint. Oh yeah, that looks really nice. Even more water. And that'll make it clear that that part of the pupil is behind the reflection. Looks really nice. So Saru, his eye doesn't have a lot of black, so we're already done with that step on his eye. Now we can move on to the cat with the large pupil, which obviously this cat has quite a bit of black. And I like that we're kind of doing the same step multiple times to really just drill it in, help us remember what to do when we're doing each step. So this cat has a lot of black. I have a lot of water on my brush. I want to make sure I keep having that nice heavy mix of color. Giving it some nice outlines. Everywhere I see the darkest black. And we're going to go ahead and do the same thing. Take our watery brush and smooth out those edges into the lighter areas of black that we see around the eye. You can even have your grainer brush handy because there's going to be some edges that could be furry. So instead of softening them, we're making them nice, furry, fluffy edges. And in general, you'll see when I'm painting that I'm not afraid to use a lot of water. That's where the magic is with watercolor. So I'm just blotting this off a little bit. I'd probably do this a little bit more carefully if I was painting an actual portrait. But we're gonna just move through these in a quicker way today. And then I'm gonna just plop some water in there to keep that black, to kind of keep that black by the edge, just pushing that black back towards where it was originally coming from. Putting a little bit more water here because I think this would look nice if we, fluffed it out a little bit. And this cat's name is Zen, and I get to paint him pretty soon. Zen has a lot of black in his eye too. So we're painting around the iris and we're painting around those reflections. We do not want to paint those yet. We have somebody in Scotland? That's crazy. Painting eyes is the fun part. It is fun. It's the life of the portrait. So, tons of fun. Now, this cat, Zen, has some kind of almost softer black areas too in the black. So what I'm going to do, let's see, what do I got here? I have the white and I have okay. So I'm going to do the same thing we did before. And this line should be nice and crisp because that beautiful circle shape is going to make it pop. So you want to make sure this line is nice and tight. And then we can do the same thing in this area where the black is a little bit lighter. Just come in with some water and let the black bleed into that water. You can lift it too, and as it dries, that will happen in fun ways as well. I just want to make this maybe a little bit more tight so it looks good at the end. Just to make sure we have an accurate shape with this eye. And let's bring in, this is the white, kind of the white part of his eye. So we're gonna do a similar thing. Again, adding water and letting that bleed into the white part. All right, and we will move that aside to dry. We're gonna do our last eye, the dog eye. And you'll see in the reference photo I sent like it's 2 in 1. And that's because I kind of wanted you to see the difference when you edit a photo. So the top photo on the dog is unedited and you can see all the details. It'd be absolutely fine to work from that photo, but I increased the contrast and the brightness in the bottom photo of the dog. And you can see how, I wish I should probably, let's see, maybe I can let you guys see this better. Okay, cool. Here you go. So in the bottom photo, we have increased the contrast and the brightness, and it helps me because I see now, okay, those reflections are really bright. I can see where the brown is. I can see where the black is. And that looks really cool. I just think that helps me when I look at it like that. So we're going to do the same thing. South Africa, Oh my goodness, Florida, Canada. This is so cool. We're all painting together around the world. That's amazing. Thank you for being here. This is so fun. Okay, let's do the same thing. Painting the darkest darks and making sure we don't paint the iris or the reflections. Nice heavy mix of paint on your brush. And some of these shapes that are really crisp, it's kind of nice to make sure they have a nice clean line on them. And I'm kind of, sometimes it's a little bit of a guessing game where the iris is and the pupil is, especially on dogs. It just looks a little muddled. But that's, I mean, it also gives you room for error because it is muddled. That you have a little bit more room to play. And in general, we know that the pupil's in the center surrounded by the iris. So if you can't quite see, and you've tried to edit the photo as much as you can, then you can just, well, I know that the iris is on the outside and the pupil's in the middle. So concentrate your black towards the middle and then save room for the iris on the outside. Let's see. He's got some more in this. Yeah, I like to also try to capture a little bit of the black around the eye, if there is some, while I'm painting the eye. So then coming in and taking care of our edges, softening those and lightening those up too. This looks really messy right now. Isn't that funny? I mean, it's just funny because there's always this messy stage in watercolor, I think. And you could do the same thing and kind of get some furry edges while you're here. And he has a pretty black outline on his eye, but it's very light just underneath his eye. And I found, especially with dogs, well, I guess with cats too, that a little white, either lifted or lightly painted area around their eye like this helps bring a lot of life to the eye. Oh, I don't need that. It looks good. And I would just drop in a little bit more water here and see what happens as it dries if we do it like that. Pushing and dropping in water. And maybe just tightening up this edge a tiny bit. Okay, that's good enough for step one on the dog eye. And this gives us time too for everything to dry. So now this first eye is nice and dry. And step two is the iris, a nice colorful iris. In the PDF that I'm going to put online, walks you through exactly what I'm doing, like how wet your brush should be, what colors to use, and what size brushes, how heavy the pigment should be on your brush. So that will be really helpful for you and for me. Okay, so now we do the iris. And the thing is, normally I paint eyes really small, right? And so I would typically mix up my color whatever color the iris is on my palette and bring it over with the paper already dry. And that's what I say in the PDF. So we're gonna, typically with eyes, the 3-step process isn't really applying because it's such a small area. So I would, like I said, take my color, put it on dry paper. But I would do it in a way where it's really pooled, a really wet brush, so that when I lay it down, the paint pools and we have more time to work with it because it's really wet. But this is the exception. When you have an iris that's ginormous, like Saru's is here, it is more fun and it will allow your paint, it will allow for more fun techniques if you follow the 3-step process just for the iris. So painting with water, dropping in color, and this is dry. Okay, good. Because if this area of the pupil wasn't dry, it would bleed into the iris and that could be a whole thing. But it looks dry. I tinted my water just so you can see it. But it's very easy to tell where we're putting it, right? Because we already drew it out and we drew out that reflection. So we're putting the water all along where we see the iris. And don't be afraid to put a lot of water down. You want it to pool a little bit. We can always blot it out if we end up like too much. Like that's just too much water and that's ridiculous. But so much fun happens when you just let watercolor be really watery. Okay, so it's got a nice shine. So you can see that shine. Very wet, very beautiful. And Saru has the most beautiful green eyes, and green is yellow and blue. So let's start and let's let the colors mix on the paper, because that's what we like to do when we paint the 3-step process. So I have my Azo yellow, or my Joe's yellow if you're using American Journey like I am. I cannot wait to try Core, you guys. I just have a feeling I'm gonna love it. I hope I'm gonna love it because I have very high expectations. So I'm kind of putting yellow where the brighter areas of the eye are. And then I'm going to do ultramarine, and I might even throw a little bit of cobalt in there. And I'm going to focus the ultramarine on the shadow. And typically animal eyes have this nice little shadow at the top because they are round, so the light can't really reach way up there. So putting a lot of nice blue up here. This is pretty. And then, let's see, I'm going to just kind of rinse it off and drop in some water and facilitate it to mix a little bit. Just see what happens here. But I also like how it's a little bit variegated. That looks cool. I'm going to drop in some more yellow, and watercolor always dries lighter, so you got to be a little bit heavy-handed first. And I'm going to bring some yellow to the top up here so that we know his eyes are green and not blue. And cobalt is always a little bit of a risky business because it does have that opacity piece to it. So if you really want to avoid mud and the possibility of mud, it's best not to combine opaque and transparent. But cobalt's also awesome, and I love it, and it's gorgeous. So we're just gonna try it. And I'm just dotting it in and letting it mix how it wants to, and we're gonna see. And then the other thing that I do mention in this PDF that I'm going to share with you after I load the pictures on from today is that now what you want to do is we want this iris to totally dry before we move in and do the reflections. But you also might want to babysit it, and that's my term for kind of keeping an eye on it and working with it as it dries, because what you could do is wait for this to get to the almost dry stage of paper, where your paper's almost dry, and that would be a really fun time to do either color resist, so dropping in little bits of color, or water, dropping in water to create blooming. Which, no, Norhan, Norhan, don't drink that. Norhan, that's toxic. Dropping in water can also create some cauliflower, some blooming that can look really cool in an eye. You have an amazing opportunity to take advantage of an iris this big by incorporating those techniques that you use when the paper is almost dry. That will be a lot harder on animal eyes that don't have a big iris like this one does. So I would keep that in mind, and I do mention that in the PDF. But for time's sake and for, mostly for time's sake, we're just going to move on. So let's see, which one's more dry? This one's a little bit wet down here. So I'll try to see if I can create a little bit of a, not paint quite all the way, not catch the wetness. We'll find out. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing, 3-step process with this iris as well, just because, again, it's so big. If I was working quite a bit smaller, I probably wouldn't do that because I just wouldn't have enough room. So again, you would just come in with your yellow color and paint yellow right away. But you would want to use a lot of water because then you would have time to potentially add in extra colors and do extra techniques. So, I guess I could show you that. Why don't we do that? Because that might be something you'll want to use. So let's just go in with a heavy but really wet brush. Heavy mix of paint on a nice wet brush, and we can see how this paint is pooling. And I gotta be a little careful not to get too close to the pupil. I'd rather not have that black bleed into the yellow because then it'll just look gross. So we are doing a heavy mix, and this is what we would do if the iris was small. If it was really small, you wouldn't even really need a really wet brush because it just wouldn't make that much sense. You wouldn't really have the space you need to do a lot of those more fun techniques. So we went all around the iris with that yellow color because that's the main color in Zen's eyes. Again, if this was a real portrait, I'd be a little bit more particular about going all the way to the edges maybe and making this a little bit cleaner. What's bleeding in right there? I think that looks kind of cool. I like how that looks. So you can see, I think, how shiny that yellow is. And we'll keep going. I like it when your cat helps you paint. Special effects. Yeah, that should be one of my 13 techniques. Have a cat helper and you'll get special effects. That's funny. All right, I'm going to save this brush to be yellow. And I'm going to come in, and it looks like he's got a little bit of orange. But I'm hesitant to add pink because I don't want his eye to look red. So what I might do is actually add purple. So I'd mix up a little bit of purple. Purple is our best friend because it plays well with cool colors and it plays well with warm colors. It's our buffer color. So I'm going to mix up the purple in my palette first. A heavy mix. We're going to need it heavy, so I'm trying to scrub a lot of pigment and putting it into that mix. And I'm going to grab some blue. I kind of want it to be on the pink side of purple, though. So a pinky purple. And let's see what happens. We're going to find out how well this mixes. Over on this edge of the eye is darker, and it's darker up on the top. It has that beautiful shadow. And then down here, it actually does look like a little bit green down there, which is kind of cool. So let's lean into that. I'm taking another brush. And ultramarine is a bully. It's concentrated. So I'm not putting too much on my brush here. And we're going to put it around there. Okay, right now it looks pretty muddy, doesn't it? And we can fix that. So I'm just going to come in with water. And that brush is very small. It's annoying. Okay. Come in with water. I'm just going to drop in more water. And that will help facilitate these colors to mix a little bit better. And so I'm just kind of mixing them myself. And I'm also lifting a little bit of that yellow as we go. That azo yellow, I wonder if it has some opacity or not. I should probably know that. And see how it's kind of brightening it up, making it a little bit more transparent and watery. And that's really pretty, I think. Oh, we got a little bit of the pupil. That's okay. I'm going to put some more right here and see if we can let it mix in pretty ways. I'm going to add even a little bit more blue. I'm just putting some blue on my purple brush. Since it's orange, but it's also kind of green. There's a lot of color in this eye. It's so pretty. So I added some blue up here. I'm going to add more water and let it mix around. So water is your best friend, especially with eyes, especially with irises in an eye. Again, what you could do is continue to babysit this eye, and I absolutely would if this was an eye on one of my portraits, and I would go in and do color resist and drop in water if I felt like it could benefit from a little bit more textury, watery techniques. But otherwise, we can go ahead and put this aside and then move on to our dog eye, which will be significantly different than a cat eye. They have, like we talked about, they have kind of more of a muddled iris and pupil sometimes, especially dogs with dark eyes. Dogs with blue eyes would be different. So what we're going to do is go ahead and come in and grab our gold, quinacridone gold, heavy mix on a wet brush. And you might not need it to be quite so wet if you're working a lot smaller than this. But we need this to go far, so we're going to make it wet. And it looks like he's got some of this gold over here. And I'm not as afraid to let the iris kind of blend in with the pupil on a dog. Especially a dog eye that looks like this. So I'm putting it all over around these. No, Norhan, don't drink that. Norhan, don't drink that. Norhan, don't know what to do with you. Alright, let's see. So yeah, it's kind of muddling in with the black area we painted, and I like that. I think that makes it look good. And it can do some fun things if we let it do that. Okay, let's see here. So I'm even kind of facilitating that blend a little bit because I like how that looks. And that's kind of it. That's kind of all I really see for the iris on the dog. And you can drop in and make it a nice saturated mix because it always dries a little bit lighter. So dropping it in, making it nice and dark. But you also don't want it to be like super opaque that you miss an opportunity to make it luminous. So I'm going to drop in a little bit of water, let it push it around. Yeah, look at that. That's pretty. I really like that. I'm going to put a little bit more water here and let it drop around. So that it's going to take a while to dry. That's the only caveat. And that's also why what we're going to do next, before we move on to the reflections on all three of these eyes, is we're going to practice reflections. As reflections will be the life of your eye, that and then a pretty iris. This will be the life of your eye. So let's just say what we're going to do to practice this is we're going to give ourselves a couple reflection shapes. So random reflection shapes here. Sometimes reflections are like windows, and sometimes they're reflections that have people kind of standing in a window, and so it's more abstract. So we have 3 different reflection shapes. And now before we, when we start to paint the reflections, right, we already have the black outlines and we already have the iris done. So these reflections are going to be surrounded by paint. Now the thing is, let's just say that this reflection is next to, and I'm not going to put it right next to the reflection because I don't want it to be wet, but let's just say this is on a brown iris. Let's say this one is, let's do this, let's make this one green, because we have cats, a lot of cats have green eyes. So let's say this one's next to a pretty green iris, okay? And then let's make this one, we can just make this one a blue, if we're lucky to have a blue-eyed animal. I don't think they're very common. Huskies get blue eyes, and some cats have blue eyes, and puppies have blue eyes. So that's really pretty. Okay, so now we have these different eyes that have different iris colors, and this is important because what we're going to do, the first thing when we paint reflections, is we paint another outline around the reflection. If we're working with a warm eye, like brown or yellow, we're going to want to paint with that beautiful helper buffer color, purple. If we're painting with a cool eye, we would use ultramarine blue, just because it makes the most beautiful reflections I've found. So we're pretending that this is a reflection on an eye, and we're doing a heavy mix on a wet brush. We don't want this outline to dry too fast. It really is this simple, you guys. You paint an outline, you grab a second brush that has just water, you blot it slightly, and you come in and soften the edge and let it bleed into the reflection just a little bit. Now, this is an important thing to practice, because if it bleeds in too much, your whole reflection could have this color, which sometimes reflections could be an entire color. And sometimes that's okay, especially if you have a ton of reflections in your eye. So that's not necessarily the worst thing in the world. But in general, you don't want it to take over the entire reflection. And then what I like to do is drop in some water and let that paint bleed into the areas of water in parts of the reflection, not the whole reflection, again, because we would lose that white space. So I dropped in water, and I'm even dropping in more water to push the pigment around. And that's it. You have a reflection right there. Now this will be different. You'll have to practice this, especially if you're working smaller. So let's go ahead and do our blue reflections on the other eyes, the eyes that are cool. The other thing with reflections too is if we had, even on a brown eye, a reflection that was completely surrounded by black, you could paint the reflection with blue. It's really only important that you have purple next to areas that are brown. But otherwise, you can use your ultramarine color in any reflection that's surrounded by a cool color or by black. So again, and if your brush is more blotted, like this, these strokes are pretty blotted. They're not very heavy wet. Like my brush was pretty blotted and not too wet. You will, it'll dry faster. You'll have a little less time to work with it, but it also won't move quite as far. So I'm showing you the same thing, but with an outline that isn't quite so wet, which might be handy. You might find you enjoy having a little bit more control by not putting quite as much water in that initial outline. So same thing, you would just come in with water, soften the edge, and allow it to mingle in some areas of that reflection. And you would do the same thing for every reflection you see. There are some reflections, though, I'll show you on this one. We're going to approach that one just a tiny bit differently. So this is cool. When I figured this out with reflections, I was like, oh my gosh, I was just really excited, because oftentimes I would just kind of go in and do these watery techniques and let things blend together, and then sometimes your eyes would get a little too muddled and it wouldn't look very fresh. So over here, we can pretend that we have a really bright white reflection next to a softer reflection. So what I would do for that, I would do something similar, where I would outline the really bright white one with my outline color, but I wouldn't bring in water into it to make these little watery bits. And I might even leave some areas really sharp. So I might not even completely soften the whole thing. So I softened it a little bit over here, and I'm going to leave that one nice and sharp. And we said it was next to a more muddled reflection. So we'll come in with our blue outline here, and we would do the same thing that we've done over here. We would soften all the edges and even bring in a little bit of color into the center of that reflection. And hopefully this will cover all our bases, because every animal eye is different. So, you know, you might not be able to follow this process exactly, but that's okay, because you'll learn as you go. Okay, so we are ready to paint our reflections on our bigger animal eyes. We can start with the one that's the most dry. Let's see. I'm just taking a look here. Actually, our dog eye is the most dry, because we had put so much water in our cat eyes. So that makes sense. So we have a warm eye, which means I'm going to do purple everywhere I see the reflections that are next to brown. This is a little wet, so we're going to see how well that behaves. I'm not quite sure. All right, let's do a little bit of purple here. I'm going to put a nice purple. Ooh, my brush is very wet. Okay, a little bit of purple here. And it's still a little wet. This isn't perfect. I think I need to let my cat out. He doesn't want to be in here anymore. Come on, Tanny. You can go. You can go play. Go in. Okay, nice little intermission. We have our purple. Now, before we paint around the rest of the reflections in blue, because the rest are next to black, we can use blue. And I just prefer to use blue because it makes beautiful reflections. But honestly, if you love purple, you could technically put purple everywhere. But before we do the blue, I'm going to go in and soften those before they get a little too hard. This is really wet. I don't really need to soften that yet, because it would just go to town. This is very wet too. Okay, let's do blue. All right, heavy mix, kind of a somewhat blotted. So when I somewhat blotted, I typically just brush my brush against the edge to scrape some of that paint off. Putting it right around the black areas, this pretty blue color. Now this might take a little bit more care and time when you're working smaller. So I just, in general, just take a little while. And then you can go in and make them a little bit softer, a little bit watery. This reflection down here especially is almost mostly colorful and not super white. So I'm adding a lot of water down here and letting it mix and blend together. Up here it's a little bit more bright white, so we don't need to add quite as much water. Just dropping in some water and letting it mix. And then over here, this one's really bright white. So, and it's still really wet. So what I actually probably would do with that one is let it dry completely and then barely soften the edges. So I'm not gonna actually touch that one right now. Now we have the white of the eye, which technically isn't a reflection, it's the white of his eye. And so what I'll do with that is just soften the black into it, just a bit. And then soften it. This one doesn't quite go that far back down his eye. And you can kind of soften it. You don't need the iris, pupil, whatever it is, quite so soft. That should be a little bit sharper. I'm going to soften this in, make it look a little muddled. Looks kind of nice. And then usually, and look at your reference photo, usually it's actually a little bit kind of brown pinky. So I'll just grab maybe a brown pink color and let that muddle into the white of his eye, but still keeping it having some white, unless it looks weird. Sometimes it can look a little weird if that area is a little too bright, looks a little off. And then this is just that one we can kind of blend in, but that's more the outside of his eye. All right, and then we're basically done with the 3 steps, right, on this eye. But in my PDF, I will also tell you a bonus step. So kind of step 4, kind of a bonus step, is you can go back in once this is nice and dry and you're happy with it. You can go in and you might need to, and I often do need to, maybe add an extra layer of black right in the pupil to make sure that's the darkest dark on the painting. Typically I found that the pupil on the eye is the darkest dark, and then maybe the nostrils. And that is just a value thing that will make your painting pop. So it'd be glazing a layer there, and you could also glaze another layer or do a couple more fun techniques on the iris itself. I just think it would look better if this was just a little bit deeper. The other thing you could do is, where these two are mixing is a little funky to me, I'm adding a little purple. And you could even add a little bit of water too. So that's kind of what your bonus step would be, is just to take another look at it and see if it needs basically just a quick glaze of paint, of color, to make it deeper. That's our dog eye. Pretty fun. I would have been a little bit more refined. I probably would have went a little slower otherwise. Okay, next we have this one. Again, it's drying and it's looking a little less fresh. I would probably go in but we would have been babysitting this, right? We would have been making sure it was drying in a way that we liked. And you can go in and give it some more color if it needed it. This is cool. I like this blooming over here. And you can lift too, typically, especially with azo yellow, because it stains. You can lift and make it a little bit more full of light while still having that yellow color show up. But anyway, we would babysit that and make sure it was something we were liking. And everywhere this reflection is black. It's not actually the reflection. I'm going to look at the reference photo. The reflections aren't really touching the iris. So let's see if we can get away with just using a blue outline here. And this is one of those reflections that we practiced, right? Where he has a really sharp one right there. Technically, that part of it is touching the iris. So maybe we would put a little bit of purple up there. It's also still a little bit wet, so we'll see what happens. And then we can just outline the rest of the reflection in blue. Oh, I dropped some water right there. That's why it's running in. Okay, and then we would go in and just soften that out. And I'm going to just drop in water. It's getting tighter here, so I'm just dropping in water without disturbing it too much just yet. There we go. And I kind of want to soften this side of that edge. Softening it. The magic is coming back in with water and softening that edge. Because right there, I mean, it just looks really kind of coloring book-like and not very watercolory yet. So the magic happens when you come back in with water and allow it to soften those edges. And I didn't touch this edge. I'm not touching that edge because I like how sharp those are. And I can always go in, like I'm going to go back in on this reflection right here. It's actually already dry, so I'll show you what I would do there. I would just lightly, a very blotted brush that just has water on it, and I would just barely soften that edge. And I have to clean it sometimes or it just picks up too much blue and makes that soft edge too thick. So I'm just barely getting the edge of that. And then it just produces a sharper reflection. So I might even just leave it because I kind of like how that looks. But I could do the same thing on this one once it dries, make it a little softer right there. The other thing we would do, of course, we come back in and we do the glazing, maybe on the iris, maybe a little bit on the pupil. I really like this, how this is lighter. I love that. So keep that in mind when you're painting your black outlines in your pupils, not being afraid to add water and let it push that black paint around. We have our last painting, our reflection on Saru's eye with the narrow pupil. And we're going to do the same thing. We're going to come in. And the cool thing is, this is such a nice high resolution photo of Saru that you can even see the reflection of his eyelashes in the reflection on his eye. I think that looks so cool. So when I painted his portrait, I put those in. And that's kind of a step 4 bonus step technique where you would want to wait until it's dry so you can get those nice sharp lines. So we got this nice outline. Not sure if I want to outline this or not. Maybe a really, really thin outline along the pupil that's in the reflection. And then we'll come in and soften those edges. And we're also going to want to soften them into the iris because you can see that it's pretty intense edge on the side. We just don't need that. So we would also soften it into the iris itself. And let that hang out. And you can even like go across, because it's nice and dry, you can go across the pupil and make it more cohesive of a reflection. We're going to blend it down here into the iris a little bit better, because that's just, it's a really intense edge and it doesn't need to be quite that intense. But don't be afraid to navigate away from the 3 steps, especially if the reference photo is making you feel like maybe you want to try something different. I'm almost kind of even lifting some of that line off where it's on the really light part of the iris, so that it's not so intense right there. Blending it in a little bit more to the iris itself. And that's basically it. This is pooling here, so I would maybe lift that a little bit. I love how there's some really beautiful granulation happening. So this is just kind of part of babysitting the iris a little bit, seeing if maybe you need to add water or color. The other cool thing with cat eyes too sometimes is that they have more of a highlight right around their pupil. So you could come back in, it would be easier once it's dry, and lift that out. Lift out a little bit of an outline around the pupil would look really good. I found that kind of looks cool on cats. And then having it be a little darker on the edges and really light next to the pupil. And then the other thing I would do, especially with Saru, is I make sure to emphasize these pretty eyelashes he has up here, and then the shadow of that eyelash. So I don't know, I think maybe I would use a bigger grainer brush or a brush that comes to a really fine point and just bring in those eyelashes. You can either pull color like I just did, or you can wait till it's dry and draw them in. But pulling color is not a bad idea, because then they won't be too harsh. So I think that looks really cool. I hope you can kind of see how we pulled color to make those eyelash reflections. Really beautiful. I'm gonna just put all the things we put up that we did so you can see them. And I will add pictures to the PDF and get that on as soon as I can, so you can have it today if you're still practicing. Here's the reflections that we painted. But it's cool to think that this process applies to such different styles of animal eyes. Really fun. So I'm just going to go back to the comments here. We have, it amazes me how much detail you and Ashley Hawks put into your animal eyes. I know, Ashley Hawks is so sweet. She's got to be like one of the sweetest people on earth. I did a collab video with her. She invited me on her channel. She initiated the whole thing. Just the sweetest. It's so generous. She told me how she sets up her lives, and that really helped me out. I love her so much, and she knows a ton about color, about paint color, way more than I do. And that subject a little bit kind of overwhelms me a little bit. So I don't know as much about color as she does. She's a Daniel Smith brand ambassador. She just knows a ton. Check her out. She's amazing. And she actually does one-on-one mentorship. So if you're looking for a really intimate painting experience, check her out. She's going to be a huge resource for you. What colors are you using to make your purple? I'm using ultramarine blue and opera pink, which can also be quinacridone magenta, rich opera, wild fuchsia. It kind of depends on the brand you're using, but the color pigment should be PR 122. I'm pretty sure. That would be in my... I think I put it in my paint supply list, the color code. So in case you're not using American Journey, maybe you're using Daniel Smith. But yes, PR 122 is the color code. So I'm using my my opera pink and my ultramarine blue, and that mixes into a really beautiful, clean purple that mixes and plays well with other colors really well. This is such a cool technique. Not familiar with this, and I'm a seasoned watercolorist. Yeah. It's honestly, it took me years to figure this out. I've just been playing with it, and then I wanted to make a system to make it easier for beginners to have more success right away with animal eyes. Because we've talked about that already. It's just the most important part of your portrait. And if you don't get that right, it's just like, oh, why, what's the point, right? And I don't want it to be frustrating for you guys if we can avoid it. I definitely need a tracing for the eyes today. I'm not a drawer on the dog eye. I didn't sketch correctly. Oh man, I can see, I'll see if I can put a tracing online. I don't know. I've just been so busy, but I feel like you could do it. But I also understand if you're not used to drawing. I'm not a drawing instructor, so I don't want you to, I'm not here to tell you how to draw, but I'll see if I can put a tracing on YouTube because I understand that would be very helpful. I love core paints. Okay, see, everybody who tries them loves them. I can't wait to try them. It's so fun. Thank you. This is a different technique from the one I use, but it's very beneficial to learn how other people approach it, and it'll just help you figure out a way that works best for you, combining it either with what you do now or just practicing exactly how other people do it. It's just really exciting. So I will get that PDF up on YouTube. So you have the whole 3-step process. You can print that out. I'm going to show you the eyes again, just so you can see them as we wrap it up. I don't have any more questions coming in on the chat. We do have another video on Tuesday, and Tuesday's video is all about Dorland's wax medium, this stuff, which I love, and I was having, oh my gosh, for ages. The only problem I've been having with Dorland's wax medium is that once you put it on your painting, it can kind of get thick and thin areas that you can see in certain lighting, and that was frustrating because I love Dorland's wax, but that was the one point of angst, I guess. And I figured out how to fix that, and you just use a brayer. So I'm going to walk you through how I do that, how I apply it to my paintings, why I like it, and why I recommend it. So that will be Tuesday's video. And then, of course, we have another live paint along on Thursday. I have one more comment from Cheryl, just jumping in here. First thing I did was watch your TV interview. You were so good. I can't believe you let them paint. I know, that's the thing, is that you need to almost just believe in yourself. That's the hardest part, is just believing that you can watercolor. And Ben was nervous. He was nervous, but he did it. I'm proud of him because it is nerve-wracking, especially to put your paint on somebody else's painting. I totally understand where he was coming from with that nervousness. But he did great. And he followed the instructions exactly, and then I just finished them at home. We ran out of time to have Elizabeth do her whole segment of the ears. So I just am finishing their portraits at home, and then I'm going to ship them back to them. They did awesome. And I thought it was so fun when Elizabeth cried. It was crazy. I can't believe. It was just such a fun experience. it's just one of those bucket list life moments that you'll never forget. Really fun. Really, really cool. I can't believe that I got to do that. It was awesome. And they reached out to me. I didn't even reach out to them. It was really amazing. So if you do paint commissions, I was going to say, they found me because I have my business cards at my local doggy daycare. And one of the people who works for that station brings their dog to that doggy daycare and saw my business card. So it wasn't even through referrals or my online presence. It was through good old-fashioned business cards that I had that opportunity. So if you do paint portraits for commission, I would encourage you to just bring your business cards to every business that will let you display them. It will help. It will do something. Okay, that's all I have for today. Thank you guys so much for joining me, and I am so excited to see you again on Tuesday. Very, very happy painting.